Welcome to Soltron. This is the video review for Tobot Regent. Here's a size comparison. He's about 8.5 inches. And here's how he looks with the other figures from this line. And let's talk about this really bad design choice with his face. So you can see the lighting does cast a shadow. This guy's got a really heavy visor too. So he's got a good shadow across his face, but his face is white, so you can easily make out all the features. You can still really tell what's going on. Whereas this face, it's really difficult to see what's going on in there. It's so dark. So the issue with his head here is he's got this big overhang on his forehead, plus he's got this high collar that's not even letting that light in. Plus his face is already painted a dark gunmetal kind of color. So really you just cannot tell what's going on in there. It's a little bit easier to see in person, but it's still very dark. So the easiest thing to do is just rip off his head. It's on a ball joint. And there you can see his facial features a little bit better, but it's still pretty difficult to see. So you can see he's got kind of a silvery face, he's got a very pointy little elf nose, and then he's got what looks like a scar across the bridge of his nose. So a very unique head design, and then he's got this huge head crest which kind of looks like a pompadour. So it kind of looks like a punk character, and then this huge chin as well. But again, really poor choices here. Probably, if I modify this figure, I'd probably have to paint his face white just so you could be able to see it. It's just very hard to see. I like the color a lot, but it's just a little too dark. One thing I would definitely do to modify this is move his neck joint from here and just move it forward a little bit so he could turn his head. So when I pop this back in, you'll see he's got real articulation issues here. Okay, so while we're on the subject of articulation, his head can turn about this much. It is on a ball joint, so he can look up a little bit, and he can look down a fair amount. But he cannot turn his head pretty much at all because of these huge collars on either side of his head. And again, it just makes his whole face just covered in shadow. It's almost impossible to see. The shoulders do have good outward range. So it's got this joint right here, which allows it to move up. And then the bicep has a little bit of outward motion too. So he's got a fair amount of outward range. It's definitely more than 45 degrees. And then he's got double jointed elbows, so you can get his elbow all the way up here. And then, this is very rare on a Tobot, he's also got wrist articulation just built in, so that's very nice. And then, I've never seen this before, or actually I have seen this before, but he has also finger articulation. So Deltatron also has finger articulation in his gloves. So pretty decent on the arms. The only thing that's missing again is bicep swivel. You get none of that. And then you get 360 on the shoulder, but you're going to have some hindrance with these wheels on the back. Those are just going to get in the way. If you want to get his shoulders out, you're not going to be able to tilt them up because of the wheels on the back. And then another nice touch is he does have a waist swivel, but that's for transformation, so it's got a ratchet, so it will kind of just flick back into place unless you have it at 90-degree angles. And then you do have good strong hip ratchets, and then very far forward kick, which is 90 degrees, and then 90 degrees back, no problem. And then outward motion more than 90 degrees. So good joint there. And then he also does have thigh swivels, but they almost don't swivel at all. So they don't move out very much. They move out enough so that they're there, but it's pretty minor. That's something else I would definitely modify, is I would open up this joint and cut whatever tab is keeping this from swiveling out more, because that's definitely what's impairing it, is some kind of tab. And then for the knees, you do get a double joint knee, so it does fold more than 90 degrees. And then he does have toe articulation if you need that to help stabilize him. And that's it for his articulation. So overall, he's got a really interesting look. The color scheme is really great. This orange goes so well with this kind of teal color of his base color. And then the black is definitely a nice contrast from the other figures that are just white and bright. This guy looks very dark, which is good for the most part, except for in this face region. Definitely needs to be lightened up. But he's got a really cool look to him. Like he's got this wedge for a chest, and then the back is very clean. He's got the two front wheels and then the rear wheels of his dune buggy motor, his heels. So he's got kind of an interesting look, and he reminds me kind of like maybe like a skater or something like that. It's like he's on a pair of roller skates. But his articulation works really well. You can get really dynamic looking poses out of him, except for, unfortunately, his head can't really turn to face wherever you have him turned. But you could definitely get some action poses where it looks like he's just skating along, ready to attack some enemies with his no weapons. So I like the look of this robot a lot. The orange highlights work really well and give me kind of a Tron vibe. So I'd really rate this robot mode as an 8. It's just a strong, good-looking robot, very clean, interesting geometry and shapes on him, like a lot of hexagon kind of shapes. Okay, and for transforming him, you can just leave the key inserted into his chest. Again, this is a nice piece of metal with a plastic insert, so it's got a good amount of heft to it. You could just leave this inserted in for the whole transformation, because that's where it goes for car mode anyway. There's not a second place to put it. So his hands swivel up, and then they're just going to close in on his shoulder here. And you do the same for the other hand and double joint it up to his shoulder. The head is kind of just going to look up to transform. And then this guy's got a pretty in-depth transformation compared to most Tobots. So he kind of has an accordion thing going on. So his head section is all going to extend up, and then his waist section is also going to extend. So now he's kind of been unfolded. You can kind of see how this is going to work out. And now his waist, you're just going to rotate 180 degrees. His giant back wheels, you're just going to rotate those out of the way. And then you can see we've got pretty much, he's halfway transformed. So now you're just going to clip the legs together. And then you're just going to rotate these all the way around, which will make the roof of the car, and then rotate down his toes to fill in this gap. And then you can see this is the windshield of the dune buggy. And then there's clips here that correspond to little clips in there. So you're going to want to get that all lined up. And he's mostly transformed. You're going to get his arms. And this is where kind of the complicated Tobot action happens. So this is a little bit more complicated than usual. Is you get a swing bar right here. So this bar is actually going to swing into position, and then you rotate the arms back into place, and then there's a double joint in the shoulder which lets these arms lock into here, which is kind of where the doors of the dune buggy would be. And then finally the front wheels just rotate up, and then this is where his head is. It kind of looks wonky regardless of whether you have that up or down. I guess down hides the face better. And then you can just plug the key back into this front section here. It's very hard to get this key out once you plug it in because the head section's in the way. And then the key does have a key gimmick. It's very hard to see, but the keyhole's right here. And then to start the transformation, you're just supposed to twist the key and it opens up this section. And that's how you start off the transformation. It's not a very useful gimmick, but it's nice that it's there, I guess. But you can easily transform it just by pulling it apart, because it's just on two little clips. So, unnecessary gimmick, but it doesn't take anything away. It doesn't get in the way. So there's his completed mode. And this mode is very interesting looking. I really like it, mostly because of the color scheme. I'm not a fan of these kinds of vehicles in the first place, but this is an interesting looking vehicle. I'd say for me it's kind of a 6. It's nothing special. And it really makes me want to get the Generations Sandstorm again. I want to get that Transformers figure. And this is how he scales with just the deluxe. So he's still way too big, way out of proportion, but at least these figures are getting a little bit smaller. And here's how he looks with his wave mates. He is a little bit large compared to the Jeep. I would think that this would be the biggest vehicle, but he looks a little bit larger just the way he stretches out. So overall, I think Regent is another fun addition to this line. I wouldn't say he's completely essential. The fun factor and durability on him is the same as the other figures. He feels like a 10. He's solid. Everything pegs in perfectly. The plastic feels like it's going to last forever. And the fun factor is he's a pretty simple transformation with very little kibble, and he just looks good in both modes. But I'd say don't get this figure unless you're really into him, because he just doesn't really add anything that you haven't seen before. He's kind of par for the course. I got mine from my favorite eBay seller soon, so I'll leave a link in the description. And this is kind of like a half transform mode where he can still be on his wheels, if that's something you're into. Or a Transformers movie motorcycle fembot kind of mode where his legs are fused together into this giant wheel. But yeah, good figure, but I don't know how much I need him when I have two other figures that I like a lot better in this line so far. And then as for number 5, the DJ bus, I'm definitely not going to be getting that guy. Alright, I'll see you next time.